Hi, I'm Fiona. I'm Principal Academic in Archaeology and Anthropology at Bournemouth University. If you've clicked this link, then you're interested in studying archaeology and/or anthropology at university, and that's an excellent choice. But since you won't have had the chance to study either of those subjects at A-level, you might be a bit unsure about what's actually involved. What exactly are archaeology and anthropology? Why study them at university? What kinds of things will you be studying? And what can you do with a degree in archaeology or anthropology? So in this video, I'm going to try and answer some of those questions for you. Now, both archaeology and anthropology are very broad subjects that can include a huge range of different specialisms. They're distinct subjects, but there's also a lot of overlap. At the heart of both subjects is the study of humanity. Archaeologists and anthropologists are both interested in understanding what makes people tick. What makes us distinct as a biological species? How do we account for how different we all are and how we've changed over time? How do we interact with one another socially to create and to maintain societies? And what about the breadth of the knowledge and practices shared within and between different social groups, our ideologies and our religions, our technologies and possessions, how we make a living and how we interact with the world around us? Now, within that big picture, we can separate out archaeology from anthropology. And we can also identify two more or less distinct kinds of anthropology: social and cultural anthropology on the one hand, and biological anthropology on the other hand. Now, each of these three disciplines studies slightly different aspects of humanity in slightly different ways. Let's start with social or cultural anthropology. Now, this generally focuses on contemporary groups of people still living around the world today, who can therefore be studied directly. Social anthropologists are interested in looking at how all these different societies, including our own, actually work. And to do that, social anthropologists typically use what they call participant observation. So they go and live and immerse themselves in the society they study to see what it's like to be part of a different culture. So they might look at how people interact with one another, how they organise their groups and social lives. For example, what kind of social divisions and identities there are, gender, social class, and so on. They might look at how these affect the ways in which individuals relate to one another. They might look at ideology, ritual and religion, or perhaps at subsistence. What do people eat? How do they obtain it? Where does it come from? What do they think about it? How do diets vary depending on who you are and your position and role in that society? Or they might look at technology and things and the role that these things play in society, or indeed a host of other things that most of us end up taking for granted in our own day-to-day life. Now, as you can see, this is pretty broad, so social anthropologists usually specialise in one of a huge range of different areas. Medical anthropologists look at how different cultures think about and treat injuries and disease. Ethnomusicologists might look at how people think about and make music in different cultures and why they do that. Environmental anthropologists are interested in how people think about and interact with other animals and landscapes. And other social anthropologists take a more applied kind of an approach, working to protect, support and advocate for different cultures. If you've studied and enjoy sociology, psychology, human geography, the history of science, philosophy, linguistics, languages and so on, then you'll find there's a lot of crossover with those subjects, and social anthropology might well be something that you enjoy. Now, in contrast to social anthropologists, biological anthropologists are generally more interested in the biological as well as cultural differences and similarities between people, and in the long-term processes that have produced these similarities and differences. In general, biological anthropologists take an evolutionary perspective. They're interested in how and why groups of humans have evolved over time to fit better into the environments in which they live. So biological anthropologists study not only contemporary groups still around the world today, but also people in the past. So, for example, they might look at how and why physiologies differ among different groups who've evolved over time to thrive in environments that pose very specific challenges. For example, the biological adaptations that allow people to live high in mountainous regions or in very hot or very cold parts of the world. Other biological anthropologists study the remains of people from the past to understand how those adaptations came about, and indeed how humans as a species evolved from the ancestors we shared with the other apes. So paleoanthropology, the study of human biological origins, is a key specialism here. However, despite the name, biological anthropologists are also interested in studying human and indeed primate behaviour and culture, because of course behaviour, culture and biology are deeply intertwined. So some biological anthropologists study how culture evolved in the first place, how and why humans acquire so much of their everyday behaviour by learning from others rather than from our genetics. They might also look at how those behaviours and cultural practices might be shaped by evolution. What kinds of subsistence practices or technologies or even social practices and religions might be most appropriate for different environments? Biological anthropology can also be applied in forensic contexts, when anthropologists study the bones of the recently dead, for example, to help provide information that might help solve a crime or to identify the bodies of people who may have died in a disaster. If you've studied and enjoyed human biology, or biology more generally, ecology or geography or chemistry and so on in the past, then biological anthropology might be the subject for you. And last, but certainly not least, archaeology is a bit more distinct from both forms of anthropology, although there is still considerable overlap between them. Archaeologists primarily study past peoples, and because we can't simply go out and observe the way that these people live their lives, we mainly focus on the material traces they leave behind. Where did they live, and what kinds of shelters, houses, villages, towns or cities did they use and construct? What did they eat? What kinds of things did they use and how did they make them? How were their communities organised? How did they interact with others? What were their beliefs and understandings of the world? We recover much of the evidence needed to answer these questions through excavations, digging up the things people in the past left behind. So that's a key method for our discipline. But not all archaeologists dig. We also use a range of non-invasive scientific techniques, such as geophysical surveys, to study what's under the soil without disturbing it. Others study the finds uncovered during excavation, and many archaeologists specialise on different types of materials, such as stone tools, pottery and metal objects. Some study bones. Sometimes those are the bones of other animals eaten by people in the past, or kept as working animals or pets, or interacted with in other ways. Sometimes the bones are the remains of the people themselves, and here of course there's a lot of overlap with biological anthropologists who study these remains to get a better understanding of their diets, their health and their relationships and so on. Other archaeological specialists are specialists in natural scientists. For example, studying the geological processes of burial that affect what we recover from excavations and how we interpret the finds we make during excavation. And because there's more than 3 million years of prehistory, archaeologists often also choose to specialise in specific time periods or regions. Some study the earliest human ancestors, others focus on early farmers, later metal users, or early state societies around the globe. And archaeologists aren't just interested in the past. Forensic archaeologists apply their skills to modern-day remains with a view to providing specialist evidence in legal cases. For example, excavating the burials of murder victims to recover evidence about the crime. Heritage specialists also have a keen interest in the present, making the past serve the present in meaningful and worthwhile ways. For example, they may develop the legal and ethical frameworks for preserving sites and monuments. They might also study the way that these are used in the modern world and the way that they contribute to people's senses of personal, national, cultural and ethnic identities in the here and now. Compared to anthropologists, archaeologists are often much more focused on the methods that we use to extract as much information as we can from the things we dig up. But ultimately, we also aim to understand people. As a result, archaeology often overlaps with social and cultural anthropology in looking at different modern cultures in order to better understand the things we find from the past. Now, with such a broad range of specialisms, it's really difficult to list the subjects that are appropriate for applying to study archaeology or anthropology at university. They're all relevant. Your main choice when it comes to choosing between archaeology degrees will be whether to do a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. A more humanities-oriented BA programme is likely to overlap more with social anthropology, focusing directly on people in the past. In contrast, a BSc programme will probably align more with the natural and even physical sciences, focusing in particular on methods for interpreting archaeological findings, although still always as a means of getting at people in the past. Whichever path you choose, there will still be a lot of overlap between the BA and the BSc takes on the programmes. Now, hopefully this has all given you a slightly clearer grasp of what the different subjects are and what kinds of things you might end up studying if you apply for an anthropology or an archaeology programme at university level. But you might also be asking what you can do with those degrees afterwards. And let's face it, even if you're not, your parents are probably asking what jobs you might be able to get at the end of an archaeology or an anthropology degree. Well, the answer is that archaeology and anthropology degrees are extremely well respected and equip you really well for a huge range of different careers. You may be interested in these subjects, of course, because you want to go on to be an anthropologist or an archaeologist. Anthropologists often go on to work in the public sector, for example, for charities, for NGOs and in development, or in the civil service, local and central government, social research and policy, and so on. Archaeologists often work in the commercial sector, planning and local government, as well as, like many anthropologists, in the broader heritage sector, in museums and other heritage attractions, national parks, conservation, tourism, and so on. But the skills you acquire for an archaeology or an anthropology degree are in demand much more broadly than that. We live in a global society, and employers are thrilled to be able to take on people who have a good understanding of how different cultures work and how people interact with one another. Given the crossover between the humanities and the sciences involved in these programs, employers are also really happy to find people who are both analytical and can communicate well with other people. So many of archaeology and anthropology students progress onto graduate schemes in all sectors, from retail to the financial sector via teaching, and others go into law, the media, advertising, marketing, project management, personnel management, human resources. Graduates with a slightly more analytical mindset might go into law enforcement, construction, chartered surveying, general science, research and data management jobs, and a huge range of different kinds of laboratory-based work. Other graduates, of course, go on to further study, including masters and PhDs, and some, of course, become academics. So basically, with an archaeology and anthropology degree, you can do anything that you might do with another generalist degree, such as history, geography, English, and so on, as well as going on, potentially, to a job in the sector. Now, I hope that's given you some idea of what archaeology and anthropology are and why you might be interested in studying them at degree level. These are incredibly interesting and exciting subjects to study. They're very radical subjects because they provide fascinating insights into things that we really often take for granted about our own society. And they give us lots of ideas about how other cultures do things very differently, and therefore how we could potentially do things differently. They're also very relevant, topical and practical subjects. It's never been more important to look properly at the differences and similarities across different cultures and groups of people across the globe today. It's really, really important to understand how the past informs the world today and to face up to those parts of our historical identities of which we're particularly proud or indeed ashamed. And it's really, really critical, more than ever before, to think about how other societies think about and interact with the world and other animals, and how all cultures can work together to find more sustainable ways of living and respond collectively to the worst threats of the 21st century globalization. Plus, of course, archaeology and anthropology will give you lots of opportunities to travel and to experience different cultures. They'll equip you with lots of extremely employable skills, and they look great on your CV. So hopefully I've convinced you these are subjects worth studying. But where do you go from here? Well, the challenge for you is that because both subjects are so broad, every programme at every university will offer a slightly different range of specialisms. So your job now is to look at a range of different universities and the areas that they specialise in to decide which one suits your interest best. Most universities will have a list of units or modules, some of them mandatory and others optional, that make up your degree programme. So look really carefully at what's available. If you're interested in anthropology specifically, come along to the next London Anthropology Day if you can. And for archaeology, check out University Archaeology Day. These are both completely free events at which all the universities running anthropology and archaeology related programmes respectively run stalls and give talks. So it's a great chance to get a real sense of the range of stuff that goes on in the subjects and to compare and contrast the universities that you might be interested in. And of course, go along to University Open Days to get a real feel for facilities and location and ask all the questions that you need to. And after that, well, it's up to you.